Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Singing with Survivors of Sexual Abuse. My name is Mike McMahon, and I am the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. Over the last couple of years, our executive committee has been talking about this issue as it pertains to the Hymn Society, how to create a safe environment for our events, for our members, to create a culture in which we let survivors know that we believe them, and giving them a safe space in which to let it be known if something would happen to them. So if you attended the conference this past summer, you probably saw a statement in the program book and on our website alerting you to the policy of the Hymn Society. But this is something that we are facing kind of late. The issue of sexual abuse has been with the church for a long time, and we've heard it rather famously in relation to the Catholic Church and Hillsong and lately the Southern Baptist Convention, but it is a wound in the body of Christ, and it's something that we need to talk about and reflect on. So I'm really, really grateful for our panelists today. Kate Williams is the Vice President of Sacred Music for GIA Publications in Chicago, and Laura Lynch is a longtime pastor, musician, and music director in Illinois as well. And I'm so glad you're with us and willing to share today. Before we get started, we have a little poll that we'd like to ask you to complete, and just asks your place in the church. Are you clergy? Are you church musician, worship leader? Are you a congregant participant, or are you something else? If you would complete that for us, we'll get started in just a moment. So I'm going to disappear and hand this over to Kate.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike and Brian and Courtney and Stephen. I'm so grateful that the Hymn Society is making space for conversations like this. So as he said, I'm Kate Williams. I am the Vice President of Sacred Music at GIA. And I was honored to attend my first Hymn Society conference just this past July. So I got to meet many of you in person. And it's always a blessing to bear witness to the incredible work that you have dedicated your lives to by way of sung prayer and in a variety of settings and denominations with people of all walks of life who create the beautiful tapestry of image and likeness of God. It is sincerely my absolute privilege to have the time and space to be able to talk with you today about a rather tough subject. If the title and the description of this webinar was not clear enough, let me just take a moment to make sure that you know that this topic is about abuse, specifically sexual abuse, manipulation, power imbalance, and abuse of power, coercion, mental and emotional abuse, and trauma related to harm in a religious or spiritual setting. And while we're probably not going to go in depth about any specific harm, the mere mention of these things may bring a lot of emotions to the fore. And you may need to take breaks from listening, and you should do that. You should take the time that you need. It's okay. I encourage you to go slow. My understanding is that this is being recorded, and you can return and watch and listen at a pace that is most comfortable for you. Take as many breaks as you like. I believe that emotions are a gift. They're expressing the truths that are deep within you that maybe only you and God have full access to, but they're a gift. And so I'm inviting you to treasure them, even though they might be very painful. It's good to have a conversation partner, or like a spiritual director or a trusted friend to help you process the emotions that come up in conversations like this. And if you're looking for a safe place to process these emotions, you can send me an email and I will be sure to point you in the direction of someone who can be helpful. Accompaniment is very important. That being said, I am a musician and an editor, So those are the things that I'm qualified to do. I want to be very careful not to give the impression that I am a medical professional or an attorney or a law enforcement or any other type of professional that may be able to provide medical or legal care for you. I'm a pastoral caregiver. And I primarily am a pastoral caregiver via music ministry. And while I am a mandated reporter and I will report abuse to the appropriate authorities, I do try to be sensitive to and aware of the limits of my own care so that we can get people into the right hands so that we can really work towards true healing and justice. Most of what I've learned about centering the voices of survivors in this context came from the organization called Into Account. They have a website, it's intoaccount.org, and that was founded by Dr. Stephanie Crable. And I would trust this organization with my life, and I have, like Laura can testify here, many survivors of trauma and abuse have trusted their story and their lives to this organization and have been grateful and relieved to do so. Lots of church-related trauma is Into Account is an incredible advocate for people who have experienced trauma in faith-based community. And I encourage you, if you're looking for a place to report abuse or harm, or you simply need advice or care, you can reach out to them directly at their website, intoaccount.org. They do have a link there where you can, as anonymous as you would like, you can file a report of harm. They will walk with you very gently every step of the way, and you need not fear being exposed or doxxed or getting too far into an accountability process where you feel nervous. They will be very gentle and accompany you gracefully each step of the way. I feel indebted to Dr. Crable's patience and care and the grace with which she has advocated specifically for the survivors of David Haas. And that is the last time I will say his name in this webinar. One of the things that I've learned is that the repetition of the name of someone who has caused harm exacerbates and triggers the memories and emotions associated with those traumatic experiences. So let's not do that. If we need to say it again, we'll say DH. One of the other key themes I've learned from Into Account is that if we want to create a safe environment and a system that leans towards justice for those who have been abused, we need to listen to survivors. We need to believe survivors. We need to take them seriously. We need to not simply talk about them, but talk to them. We need to acknowledge that we know that there are survivors in the room, in every room that we are a part of. It's for this reason I'm so grateful that Lara Lynch, a music minister from Chicagoland and a survivor of abuse, said yes to this invitation to be in this room for this chat. And I give her full reign to simply sit and listen if that's what she would like to do, or to interrupt me, or to clarify or answer questions as she sees fit. Centering the voices of survivors is especially hard to do if you had made sure that they're not present. So we're making sure that they are. So thank you very much, Laura, for joining us. And while I am so very glad that she is here with us today, it's also not her job to make us understand. The burden of better understanding and right judgment lands squarely on the shoulders of those of us with decision-making power. Some of us have greater responsibility than others. So I invite you in this moment and in every moment to consider the ways that your unique context gives you certain privileges that are not afforded to others. Perhaps this is because you identify as male. That's a privilege. Perhaps it is because you are white. Perhaps you have a comfortable socioeconomic status that frees you from that particular kind of worry or oppression. Perhaps you are cisgendered or heteronormative. Perhaps you carry clerical privilege. Please take all these things into consideration as you consider these conversations in your own communities, as you continue to talk with your communities about how you might best serve them. Now that's an awful lot of prelude with quite a bit of weight at the beginning of this talk. And I lay this out for us because of the seriousness with which I think we need to approach this subject. But I could not and would not have this conversation if I didn't believe in, number one, the urgency with which we need to have it. Number two, the possibility and the proof that I have seen of new life in the wake of life-altering trauma. And number three, the unexpected and absolute gift that doing this hard work has been to my life. These women that I have come to know through this specific instance of abuse, courageous, dedicated, articulate, incredible and powerful humans. All of these women continue to teach me a new way of living that I believe brings us closer to what we know is that beautiful kingdom of peace and justice. So let me say clearly, unequivocally, I believe these women. I believe them. I believe you. I know you're on the call. I believe you. And I believe you not because I choose to believe you, but because your truth compels me to see no other way forward but together, hand in hand, believing in one another and believing one another, helping each other to lift voices that have been ignored for too long. So yes, this is a serious subject. It's hard. I'm not afraid to admit that lots of times I cry and want to give up. But the light at the end of this tunnel is too beautiful and too bright to ignore now. So here we are. Laura's here. Brian's here in the background. He's gonna watch the chat where you can answer or ask questions, and he'll join us again at the end so that some of those questions can be asked and answered live for those people, especially who are viewing this another time. So the most obvious example in my life is that of DH. And I want to caution all of the people on this call who might be tempted to lean into the argument of, he hasn't harmed anyone in my community. There are over 50 women who have filed reports on DH, and it seems unlikely that they are the only ones, that they are the complete picture of the story of people who have been harmed. Many, many survivors of abuse never come forward for many reasons, or out of embarrassment or shame, out of fear of being disbelieved, out of fear of being ridiculed. But the statistics show that at least 1 out of every 6 Americans, at least 1 out of every 6 Americans is a victim of assault and abuse. That means that there are most definitely survivors of assault, survivors of abuse in every single worshiping community across our nation. And I think Brian has a little poll prepared too. If you are, or if you know someone in your community who is a survivor of assault. There it is, the poll popped up. And as the news of this one particular man made its way through denominations in 2020, we saw that the mention of one man's actions triggered memories and emotions for every single person who had ever experienced harm in their life. It generated its own wave of the Me Too movement that hit us right in our own homes, our own churches, our own families. So continuing to sing his music sends the message that not only this one man's actions will go unchecked, but that any or all abusers, 90% of the people on this call are or know someone who's a survivor of assault. And when we continue to sing his music, as some people have chosen to do, we're sending the message that it's not just that his actions will go unchecked, but that any or all abusers may never be held accountable. It's not just about one man. It's never just about one man. It's about how we handle ourselves as individuals and as communities when disclosure of harm has been made known to us. It's not just about one abuser. It is never just one. And it's not only about one survivor. Even the survivors of this one man are not a monolith. They have their own experiences, their own lives, their own opinions about what they would like to see happen in their communities. And that's important. They're a diverse group of women. They have their own hopes and desires, experiences. Some have bravely put their name and their face on their stories, identifying themselves as survivors so that others might be inspired to stand in their truth too. Thank you again, Laura, for doing that for all of us. And some prefer privacy and anonymity. And they're more than entitled to that. We should be honored to respect that, to hold those truths that may or may not have been disclosed to us with the care, the privacy, the patience that they deserve. I'd also like to caution you against the temptation to ask, but what if they're lying or exaggerating? And again, I'll point back to statistics that paint a very clear picture. Some of these statistics and reports conclude that 5% of allegations are fabricated. That's pretty low. That means 95% of the time, people are telling the truth. And even that 5%, researchers are quick to point out that even that number doesn't tell the whole story, because about 90% of survivors of abuse never report at all. At all. So of the 10% of survivors who do, of that 10%, only 5%, which means that it alters the ballpark figure of fabricated abuse allegations to about 0.5%. 99.5% of the time, people are telling the truth. Knowing these numbers, and that the likelihood that if you hear a report of abuse, it's true. Doesn't that make the all too familiar crutch of innocent until proven guilty feel like a shallow defense or a way to delay accountability. I'm not saying people don't deserve for their own opportunity to tell their side, to defend themselves. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if numbers, if the data shows that 99.5% of the time, it's the truth. If our knee-jerk reaction is innocent until proven guilty, that's just a way to delay the accountability that will need to happen 99.5% of the time. Perhaps we should be asking ourselves, not what if it's a lie, but instead ask ourselves, what if it's true and we do nothing? All of these carefully weighted factors and hours of committed listening to survivors and working with professionals like those at Into Account led us as a company to make our decision that we would remove all music associated with the one who caused harm to so many, remove it from our catalog, from our licensing venues, remove it from every forthcoming publication like a hymnal or a worship resource. Part of why I personally won't engage in the argument of separating the art from the artist is because he's still living. And as recently as August of 2021, we've seen him continue to reach out to young women using tactics that have been associated with grooming, in particular his pattern and his style of grooming. The other, perhaps more visceral reason that I will not engage in the argument of separating the art from the artist is because of the type of art that we're creating. When you think about it, we know that scientifically speaking, part of why music is so effective is because it's an embodied experience. Our very bodies literally vibrate to produce or to hear the sounds that we have called holy. Our songs are divine, our songs are prayer, our bodies vibrate, resonate with their creation. And so when we're asking people to sing the words or the notes, the melodies of a noted abuser, we are asking people to literally put the work of his hands into their bodies so that it resonates in their flesh. What could be more careless at best or cruel at worst than to ask survivors of physical assault to once again allow their body to be broken by their assailant's creation? I will not do that. I can't do that. What about mercy, you ask? I ask you, mercy for who? What about forgiveness, you ask? And I'd ask you, are forgiveness and accountability mutually exclusive? I don't think so. I think actually true love, that agape kind of love that we hope to learn and rehearse and practice as Christian people, that kind of love requires accountability for the sake of the abuser and the abused. And what about healing? What about justice? What can we do now? Those to me are the kinds of questions that are on the right path. And so I'm going to give Laura an opportunity to jump in here. Laura, what do you wish people knew about how to sing with survivors? What do you think what in your experience, what have people done or said that has been helpful, that has been not helpful? And what are you hoping that people take away from this experience of being together today?
Thanks, Kate. You brought up some great points there. the point about singing with your entire body and resonating, that is true for me and a lot of the survivors of DH. And asking us to participate in that, and even if we just don't sing or don't, it's still part of the worship experience, has been traumatizing and re-traumatizing. And it's hard to keep explaining over and over again the same argument. I think the most helpful thing that somebody has done is taken up the mantle of responsibility, so that what they go and they speak to the music director, or they go and speak to the parish priest, or they email and just say, you can't do this. You've committed your church to be, Catholic churches at least, to be a safe space. And by using this man's music in particular, you've just made it not a safe space for everybody who participates in that, not just survivors of sexual assault by DH. So I love it when somebody else does the heavy lifting, when a non-survivor goes and reaches out. I also have no problem also doing it, but in the time when I needed to really focus on my healing, that was the thing that gave me the most rest, is that somebody else took up that mantle of responsibility to help make it a safe space, because we're all welcome to that table. So that was the best thing that I could say. That was what was not helpful. Were some of the points you brought up. Shouldn't you just forgive and move on? Shouldn't we, no, that's not how this works. And we have to remember that we're called as a church to help each other with accountability. And it's important for us survivors to hear that accountability. And sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. In our case, or my case, definitely not. But that's okay. We're moving on. And so as a community, I appreciate that. Again, when someone steps forward and does that. And my story is not any more unique or than anyone else's when it comes to the survivor of sexual assault. And if you are curious, you're more than welcome to read my story on Into Account, as well as others. I hope that what you all take away from the conversation is that there's work to be done. And while it may feel you're making incremental steps, you're still pushing the conversation and change forward. And every piece of that matters. So you may not you might be planting the seed, you may not be picking the fruit, but you're on the journey and you're doing it. You're accompanying survivors with love. And that's, to me, what matters most.
Yeah, thank you. I know the experience of abuse that you had it's one kind of trauma. And then I see the last 2 years, going on 2.5 years of having your experiences be more public, and reading and hearing the feedback or the questions. I know that that's its own kind of trauma, because as you said, you're repeating yourself over and over again. There are many times when I know you and others have had to, shoulder the burden when you should not have had to. It's one thing when you're shouldering the burden in that moment of abuse, but this should be the time when your community kicks into gear and says, it's not on her anymore. It's on us to fix this thing that we know and all agree is wrong.
Exactly.
We don't want this to be perpetuated. And that's, I just having proximity to it, even, I can attest to what is just an unbelievable Herculean effort to keep going and keep being willing to be on webinars like this one and help educate and help soften hearts and help answer those questions that you've answered 200 times. That commitment to helping us right this ship. I stand in awe of you and all of the survivors every time I get to be around you. I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
And I and others are grateful for your advocacy. Thank you.
It, for me, I think I appreciate that very much. It really is a privilege, and it's hard. It's a tough privilege to have conversations like this be a part really of my daily work. It's not just people outside wondering what's going on inside and wondering what kind of conversations we have or how we got to decisions that we got to, but it's also the internal conversations. We're also, like, as members of GIA, as members of a church community, we're not a monolith. So everyone's coming at this conversation from their own perspective, and it can be exhausting to continue to do it every day. But I have to say, the thing that maybe at this point causes me the greatest frustration is when people say, aren't we done with this now?
Right? Yeah. Yeah, that's yes. And you know, I can understand the frustration that comes from that position. I get that. But it is, you know, it's inappropriate. No, we're not done with this. We're not done. We haven't rooted this out. But here's the other thing I look at too. I don't think like an abuser thinks. I don't think like that. It's not in my wherewithal. And so, and for a lot of church folk, it's not there in their wherewithal either. And so then to encounter that kind of evil, you never saw it coming. And you know, that person was a fantastic groomer of everybody and still has some staunch defenders. You know, like, no, he would, like, so I have to leave it that with people who don't get it, it's probably because it's just not in their wherewithal to even think of such evil or anger or behavior is okay, you know. But for a church we have to take class after class after class and virtues after virtues after virtues on groomer, you'd think we would be better at spotting them. And it's not just this musician. Obviously, there are survivors of clergy and other members and leaders in the church too. But yeah, that's, I wish we'd get better at that.
Yeah, me too. But for now, like, we've had this collective experience together in, you know, making more public this particular instance of an abuser. And we're changed now. We don't go back to the way we were or the way it was. We've had this experience, and, you know, like water into wine, we know better, we do better. We're different now. This is a part of our conversation in everything that we do. So I thank you for sharing just that much. I do. We're going to get to questions and answers in just a minute here. And so I want to make sure that we leave enough time in the middle of your day to do that. So I want, if nothing else that we say today convinces you that this work is crucial, I'm just going to simply invite you to remember the Gospels and look at what Jesus did. I want you to think about all the people at the margins of their community. The woman at the well, the Syrophoenician woman, man born blind, poor man Lazarus, widows, orphans, all the oppressed. Think about all of the protocols that Jesus broke to get to those people. Jesus took the risk of breaking laws and customs and expectations in order to serve the people who had been the most disadvantaged, the most harmed. Jesus quite literally went to the margins and made the people that he found there the center of the story. They're the point. They're the protagonist of his examples. He lets them take the lead. He shows them kindness, respect, shows them that he's not afraid to approach them. He's not afraid to listen to their story, as uncomfortable as it might have made their lives or the lives of those around them. And that example, this Jesus, that's the one that we follow. That is the Son of God. And that is his example, not to keep the unafflicted comfortable, but to turn the tables, give the wounded and the weary the best seats in the house, give the poor the whole kingdom, give comfort to those who are mourning, to name the meek mighty, to feed the hungry. That's the joyful and glad song that we want to resonate through our minds and our hearts and our whole being. And so as we're moving now towards questions and conversation, I hope that even if parts of this webinar so far have made you bristle or given you pause, that I hold on to that feeling and get really curious about it. Where does that come from? Where does that sense of, oh no, or I can't do that, where does that come from, and what is it about? What status quo or power might we still be clinging to yet, that if we were to let go of, there is another advance towards justice waiting for us? I hope that you carry that feeling into your continued learning and your continued research. There is lots of stuff available for you to read. There are, as we've said, there are survivors in every community. Probably a lot of them in a lot of your communities, survivors who have already come forward and who haven't been heard or believed. Listen to them. And take care as you dialogue in your communities. Take care that you are gentle with your words and your actions, that you are capable, you have the capacity for deep listening, reflection of change of your own behaviors and your own processes and your own music lineups that you've been used to doing. And that you're ready to, when you know better, to do better and make a change. There's, as Laura mentioned, we can pass this around too, but Awake Milwaukee put out a video today as their kind of summary of the Catholic Church has been going through a global synod. And so Awake Milwaukee kind of took up that mantle on behalf of all people who've been abused in a faith-based setting, particularly Catholic, to do their own survey, a conversation with people that were delivered to the Vatican. They put forward a beautiful video that just came out today with some of those summaries. And they quote scripture throughout it. The Gospels aren't enough of an example for you. Remember Corinthians. Remember that when one part of our body suffers, we're all suffering. Remember that this is lifelong work. We'll be working on how to be better on this forever. And that's a good thing. That's good news. That's good news that we can continue to do better. So I ask you, we're moving into questions now. Brian's going to come back and help us facilitate the rest of the conversation. But believe women, believe people who are disclosing harm or abuse to you. Believe them and listen to them about the next steps that feel right for each of those individuals at that time. Thank you for coming back, Brian.
You're welcome. All right, so we do have some questions in the Q&A, but I wanted to lift up a couple of things that popped in the chat first. One person, Deb Steiner, says, please speak to how to go about holding those accountable who need to be.
Yeah, I did see that question come up, and I think it's a really important one. And it's the place where a lot of people who are in decision making, uh, who have decision making power, kind of go, well, what do I do? Sometimes the answer, especially if you're hoping for accountability, like legal accountability, the answer is incredibly frustrating and disappointing. One thing is the statute of limitations, which is slightly different, I think, in each state. It's much too short. So for many of these women that I've been speaking with over the last couple of years, their statute of limitations has expired. This is a place where the Catholic Church in particular needs to take a particular kind of accountability because of the scandals in the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has been a pretty heavy-handed voice in legislature to continue to push legislature to shorten that statute so that the Catholic Church may not have so many financial ramifications. That's a sin. That needs to be called out and examined. There's no statute of limitations on this trauma and the effect it's had on these women's lives and their memory of it, and how it has threaded its way through every aspect of their living, of their family life, of their relationships, of their ability and style of parenting, in all kinds of ways. So legally, accountability may not be possible. However, my best resource towards some type of accountability for me as a person in a publishing company and as a music director, I need to make sure it's safe here. I need to make sure that I'm not knowingly exposing people to the presence of someone who might harm them. That is irresponsible. So we don't we don't work with people who have known allegations, especially credible allegations. I hope that goes without saying. They will not be here. Beyond that, in terms of accountability, really like lean on into account. I know there's other organizations. SNAP has been helpful for a lot of people, particularly in Catholic contexts. There are some other guiding post, guiding light, I think is another one. But for me, into account has kind of like, somebody wants to find catechism, catechizing to me in a beautiful way that was, catechizing is just, or evangelizing is just saying, preaching the gospel in words they can hear. That's what Into Account has done for me. They have taught me the gospel unintentionally because they said it in a way that I could hear it, where I connected the work that they do, their survivor advocacy, with the work that Jesus did. So I would feel comfortable sending everybody who's looking for what their options are for accountability to Into Account. They've got a lot on their website, but they're also really pleasant and brilliant people to speak with if you sent them a message.
Thanks. Let's jump into the Q&A, unless Laura, you were going to jump in there.
Just briefly, some of the accountability that the survivors, a lot of us are organized, and we wrote to every single bishop in the United States, asking them to prohibit the music being played. And I'm going to say maybe 30 of the 180 archdioceses or dioceses, or 40, somewhere in there. It's not even a big number. Agreed to do that. Diocese of San Jose was one of the first, and came out with a fabulous response. I think it's because of the leadership there. And then slowly but surely, but to keep it accountable, and that's just the example of this person in general. But if you have a known abuser in the Catholic Church, they shouldn't be given access or any sort of adoration or any sort of say that again?
Platform.
Yes, a platform at all, because you're causing more harm than good. But it would be great if other people would put pressure on the bishops and the archbishops and the cardinals to help send Even in our own Archdiocese of Chicago, he's not banned other than showing up at places, but his music's okay. So still allowed. We'll see.
Raising that, I didn't know the numbers there, and that's not surprising, but it's disappointing. John Tiro asked, let's jump into this question. It's gotten 2 upvotes, and so folks, if you can upvote, you can click the little thumbs up button next to any of the questions that you would like to see certainly answered. Are there other best practices identified at this point in how we choose or lead songs to help survivors of abuse beyond not using songs composed by abusers?
Yeah, I have something to say. Laura, we're gonna think about an answer too, but one of the things that has hit me, I think, at every church gathering I've been at since, even though people are not choosing his music, sometimes the music that they do choose, and this is on publishers too. I mean, we have to watch this and consider it in the music that we continue to promote and accept for publication. But the text, maybe at one time, was comforting or inspiring. Now I think of, and it ties into another question that was asked specifically for everyone born, the verse about abuser abused a place at the table, which is Sylvia Dunstan, right?
Shirley Murray, and actually someone put that in the chat, so that's great. That's
thank you.
2 birds with 1 stone.
Good. Yes, exactly. I believe Shirley Rayner Murray also said, post writing that hymn text, I think there's a Pray Tell article on this or something, that she also would not have done that again, would not have written that verse that way again. Not because it allows space for abuser and abused at the table, but because of the later phrase where it puts the onus of responsibility to forgive and kind of in a get over it kind of a way on the one who is harmed. That's not okay. And she would say that too. And so if you need to sing that song, I don't know if there's a rewrite out there, but you can omit it. You can choose a different song. There are lots of songs that have that sentiment. I love Michelle's reminder that we should continue to look at choosing songs that were written by women or people of color when we're considering when and why and how and what new repertoire to incorporate into our music lineup. So this is just an invitation for people who are choosing music. Go back and read those hymn texts that you think you've read 1,000 times and try to read it as though you're someone who's hearing this as an abused person. A touching place. Would we use that song in the same way we might have used it in 1985? I don't think so. I don't think so. Songs that mention any kind of tactile experience or even cautioning. There are some songs I know, particularly in more like praise and worship type settings that are very intimate, that speak of not only embrace, but of kissing. And I think we need to reconsider who's hearing that and prioritize the thought of who's hearing that over our own affinity for the song or our own experiences in the past we've had with that song. That's not as important as committing ourselves to not continuing harm. So that was one thing, is reconsidering texts, even if we think they're okay and they're known to us and familiar, just reconsider it again. And then I think as a music director, every single choir rehearsal you have, every single time you gather, remind yourself of the people who may be in the room, whether you know about it or not. So that if you're leaving time in your choir rehearsal to pray, that you leave time, that you're not afraid to name those particular kinds of hurt. in your prayer time, in your music choices. You're not afraid to name them. I think whenever we practice good listening and we show by example that we're not afraid of having hard conversations, or even if we are, we're going to do it anyway because we know it's the right thing. That's what I think gives people who've been harmed the impression that, you know, this person, this place might be safe, might have the capacity for my grief, and not just the capacity in the pew for another body, in the chair, in the arena for another body, but the capacity that will accompany me for the rest of my life, not just in this one moment. Is there anything you would add, Laura?
I think you said it a lot. Very well. A lot of the music director, every music director I know, curates and prays very well over their congregation's repertoire and what's going to be sung. But I love that reminder because it has made me go back and say, well, not just, is it a slow song? Is it a faster song? Is it in 3/4, 6/8, or 4/4? Like, we need a variety. You can't just have all 6/8 songs leading the whole thing. But to also think, how many women composers or people of color, or like you had mentioned, how many of those are represented in my repertoire? And it's time now to add a new piece. Let's think, what's the new that's out there? And it's with that kind of intentionality, that's how we can make change. That's how we hold people accountable, is we ask, is this safe? Am I creating a safe space? And yeah, I love that piece. Thank you.
Let's jump to the next question. An anonymous attendee asks or says, the Catholic Church is not unique or alone in this, which you've alluded to a couple of times now. How do you explain to Protestants and others outside the Roman Catholic Church who do not know the background, the story? I assume referencing DH.
Yeah. There really is a very comprehensive summary, as well as individual testimonies from women on the Into Account website, intoaccount.org. It's been shared a couple of times. It's hard to read, which makes it even harder to say out loud. You should feel free directing people to that website and letting them know in advance, probably, that it's a lot. So the first time that I read it, having already known a lot of these women and the basic horror of, you know, kind of the landscape of the issues, even knowing those things in advance, upon reading the summary, it's a lot to see in one place. It's a lot. So take your time with it. Direct other people there, cautioning them about how it's a lot. And I think it is best to do that for people who are seriously wanting to know more about it, because you do get not only the summary of experts, but you get the women's own words. And that is, I'm going to continue to repeat, that is really important. Their words, their narrative of the experience and what happened afterwards is a crucial part of the story. And of course, anonymous attendee, hi. Think very carefully, if you're going to use your words to summarize the story, about the audience you might be sharing it to, and about just how much you share. For me, I wish it was enough to say that we found out, unfortunately, that this person did some terrible things. So we're not going to continue using his music out of respect for that truth and the people who've been harmed. Sometimes that's not enough for people. And sometimes even reading the entire horrific report on Into Account apparently is still not enough for people. And we're going to have to move on to other people that we can have conversations with and work towards softening hearts and working towards better practices. And that's okay. We'll do that.
May I suggest something as well? I have a cantor coming in for a wedding this weekend, and everything that they suggested was were all songs by DH. Of course, you're right. And I kept, it was an email conversation. And so I don't always hit people over the head with the full bat. I'm just like, no songs by that composer allowed. We at the parish I'm at are committed to providing a safe space for all churchgoers, and that excludes any works by him at any time. But if the couple needs more help or you'd like more suggestions, I'm happy to point that to your way. Now the cantor came back with, well, what about this song? And I said, maybe you'd like to, when you're ready, here's where you can find some more information, or you could simply Google. So in my learning, in revealing part of my story, I have to remember 1 in 6 people have been sexually assaulted. And there's a good chance I've spoken to someone who's, if they haven't themselves, they know someone who has. And so my story, when I was sharing it to some trusted friends, that brought out their stories, whom they'd never shared before. And so it's just this dance of, we just need to be careful with one another and kind, and just being, like you said, going to the market, just being there for each other, accompanyingly, as lovingly and patiently, and as with kindness and respect that we can. We're just one blip in the millions of years of God's creation. So we can only do what we can with what's in front of us. But yeah, for those asking, you just keep it real succinct. We are committed to creating a safe space that excludes work from that composer, and if they need more, you can go more. But.
Excellent.
I love the comment in the chat, and I apologize for the background noise if you can hear my son yelling. I think he's playing video games. Michelle says, diversifying repertoire diffuses power.
Yeah.
I love that comment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michelle.
It's so like concise, but it's also like, I think it really gets to it.
Yeah, I think that's it, definitely. And I know Michelle has done a lot of work too, helping to be a good advocate and a good voice for people who've been harmed in faith-based settings. One thing that I wanted to mention along with that is that, like, it's at every level that this happens. Into Account has talked, very eloquently about what they've observed in our church music circles as kingmaking, because of the way that certain artists have been given a bigger platform, or been given more space, or been given more publication space. That is something, not that everyone has to be completely equal, but it's something that at convention level, at publishing house level, at local community level, at diocesan level, each aspect, each song choice that we make needs to be examined through that lens. How much diversity is a part of our planned repertoire, and what has the most power, simply by virtue of its greatest share of space. When we were making a hymnal, we talk about the pages of a hymnal like they're real estate. Who has the most real estate in this book? Who has any real estate in this book, and who has none? And what does that mean?
One question in the chat, and then I'd like to ask a question if I may. But the question in the chat is there a list of bishops who agreed not to use the music we're referring to?
So that list is held by one survivor in particular. I could see about getting that, because it was one of those Google spreadsheets, right? Who contact, here's the name, here's the address, here's the email address, here's the response or no response. But go ahead and start with Chicago, Milwaukee. Those are giant archdioceses. Feel free to I don't know why Cardinal Supich hasn't banned it, or why whoever the cardinal is, or the archbishop up in Milwaukee. But you could start there, but I can see what I could do to find out about ways of getting that together if people were interested in advocacy.
I'd certainly be willing to publish that list on our blog if you'd want to make it public.
Oh, I will reach out to the survivor who's in charge of that list for sure. Yeah.
Nothing like a little public pressure to.
No. Yeah.
All right, my question is, I'll preface it with, I was just at the Calvin Institute for Christian Worship. It was a summit of about like 30 scholars practitioners who were talking about power, access, and participation in congregational music making. And one of the things that I shared, and we each got to do like a little 10-minute, they called them a lightning talk, was I've been thinking about this upcoming webinar that we're on now. And I'm also I'm certainly not a scholar of the church's history, but I love reading about the church's history, and I love reading theology, and of course I love congregational song. But one of the things that I'm fascinated by, and I also constantly lament, is the history of the church and the present day church's seeming inability to talk about sex. And I think that's something that actually undergirds this entire conversation. Is it's not only difficult to talk about abuse situations, the church doesn't seem to even be able to talk about healthy sex situations. And in my lightning talk, I talked about power, and that sex and music are two of the most powerful things that God has given us in creation, that they can create beauty, right? Music can create such beauty and so much healing and wholeness. And sex can too. Sex can create deeper relationships. It can create life. It can create, pleasure, right? And all these things are good. But because they're so powerful, when they're used in the wrong ways or for evil purposes, they are equally powerful in the opposite direction. And the church just seems unable to talk about any of that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that I've often wondered if having healthy conversations in the church about positive sexual relationships and really starting to unpack all the damage that's been done in the past by the church in repressing people's sexuality and things like that would help these conversations go to a healthier place and a more productive place. So that's a statement / wondering that I've been wrestling with.
Yeah. No, that's really, really smart. I know a lot of people, even connected to Into Account too, like Emily Joy. I want to say her last name is Allison. She got a brand new book called Church 2, Me Too. Me Too, Church 2 might be the way around. I would recommend everybody read that book, because my perspective also, and Laura's too, in large part, we're both Catholic. So our perspective about how we have a conversation about sex and sexuality includes our dialogue with clergy and magisterium, who in our faith-based tradition are celibate men. And so having a conversation about good sex with a celibate male doesn't happen that often. And if it does, it's kind of, how do we find our footing here? There are really good people practicing really good sex education and body positive theology. And just as the same as the problem that you're articulating here, there's also a lot of people doing a really poor job at it, or really shallow job at it. I want to say on my best days that the very binary either or, sex is good or it's bad, is kind of like a religious knee-jerk reaction to when something bad happens. We don't do that anymore. We just don't do it. We don't talk about it. We don't do it. I want to believe in the motivation behind that just being not malicious, just pure. Like, if that can be used for harm, let's have nothing to do with it. But I really believe that it's in that it's one of those in the gray area places where, of course, people want to find out how to have healthy sexual relationships and view themselves as a healthy sexual being. And also, we're working within the confines of an institution that has declared the people it will elevate to the highest ranks will not have sex. So it's a complicated question, but I do think it's a good one. I would have loved to hear your 10-minute spiel on music and sex.
Well, let's keep going. Let's see. Can you another? Yeah. Could you discuss the pastoral ethical training and application that is available and needed for music leaders in churches, the academy, and conferences / organizations? So the pastoral ethical training and application that's available.
Mhm. Is insufficient, is inadequate.
That's the answer to a lot of these questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
What we have as a requirement in the Catholic Church, or at least in every diocese I've been a part of, is a program called Virtus. And it is, a 1 day, maybe a morning workshop where you watch a video and you fill out a couple of worksheets. And then every month they send you what they call a bulletin. You read the bulletin and you answer the very easy questions of, should Johnny have touched the 6-year-old, or should he not have touched the 6-year-old? And you choose the answer to the question, and boom, you're certified. And that feels like irresponsible. It feels inadequate at an irresponsible level. That can't be the only thing that we do. If you work for, at GIA, we have some further sexual harassment type training that we do because we're a part of a corporate entity. But as far as I know, churches don't mandate anything. Mandating is important because people won't do it. People won't do anything if they don't have to, or they'll Google it and say, I did it. But also, I think I don't know that the church in particular has focused enough resources to make that mandated training the quality and then the depth that it needs to be. So it's a very dissatisfying answer, but essentially, if you're the pastor, if you're in charge of your community, you can find other resources, or you can intentionally keep the conversation on the table. And that is probably the best way to be both pastoral and ethical in simply even the fact that you're keeping the conversation going is important. It's not a once a month easy multiple choice training. It's an ongoing integrated part of your work. And of course, there are many companies or organizations who have training videos or training programs or simulations that you can watch your way through. But I don't know, other than what's already required in our local, in our denomination, Catholic churches, in terms of Virtus, if there's anything really being done. Maybe Into Account should start a service where they offer training. Actually, Hillary would be really great at that, I think.
Oh gosh, she would. Yes. It's kind of a vacuum though. There just isn't, that doesn't exist yet. So what a great opportunity for growth to happen. Because I mean, there had to be something, right? When there was nothing. So Virtus came along in 2099, wherever it was. So for 22 years, we've had to sit through that presentation, and part of that, at least in the Archdiocese of Chicago, is they make you listen to the viewpoint of a pedophile. And that's just, every time I see it, I want to, I like, really? Why are we giving this person any sort of access? And I get the thought process behind it. So, but yeah, it's time. It's the conversation's elevated. Women are taking a much larger role at school in the church. So are other folks too. So that's a great opportunity to grow.
Yeah. Adam mentions that Into Account's launching programs for schools, institutions, will lay this kind of groundwork.
That's great.
I think one of the issues at hand here is that the church is decentralized, and we have a multitude of denominations. Catholic the Catholic Church is broken up into dioceses, and Lutheran churches have different synods, and all of them are able to make their own decisions on what programs to use and what training to use and whether or not to mandate it and when to mandate it. Is it only for children, or is it a more holistic program? And there's so many choices that are left up to individual congregations or even individual power brokers, like the pastor gets to choose. It really invites it's not a good system. It's just so bad. Yeah, I mean, it would be wonderful for a program that could really be adopted across many of the largest denominations and across all the dioceses and all the synods and all the presbyteries, where we all agree, like, this is the most scientific and thoughtful theologically based training, that then gets resourced and continually improved on a regular basis. Because that's the other issue, is that they tend to just get made and then they sit there, like you mentioned, like the last 20 years it's been the same presentation. It's like, can't we pour some time and energy into this and finances?
Yes.
Right. But I'm not sure how that would get done.
Yeah. Well, we just keep pushing. We keep saying it. Keep pushing, keep saying
Right.
it. Yeah. There's a couple of comments here that I think I can encapsulate in just because I think this is a particularly good point. The question about if you stop singing the music of someone who is sinful, isn't it like shunning that person? And I think I just want to encourage us to think a little bit bigger than just the idea of shunning or welcoming. Because are they shunned as a human being? No. Are we responsible for creating safe environments by way of what we're asking people to consume and what we're asking people to put themselves in proximity to? That's our responsibility. We have to make tough decisions as a part of our responsibility as decision makers. Sometimes that tough decision is removing access points from people who have shown a pattern of abusive behavior. That's not shunning, and it's not what my favorite thing people like to call me is a participant of cancel culture. Cancel culture is a very divisive and a way to minimize people trying to express good accountability practices for people who have been harmed. Cancel culture, we're not canceling them as human beings. Canceling, we are putting a barrier of access between them and vulnerable people. And that's a good thing. That's not a quick to dismiss type of a thing. I'm centering the voices of people who have told me that this is problematic. And I'm considering that perspective above the perspective of, I really like that song. I don't know if I said that succinctly enough, but that is something that comes up a lot. The idea of cancel culture being an evil millennial construct. I just don't buy that.
Also, it's okay for people to live a life of prayer and penance after they've caused such harm. And that's not shunning, that's caring for their well-being, but removing those access points. That's it. That's a perfectly reasonable and wonderful thing for someone who's harmed so many. You go live that quiet life of prayer and penance, get the help you need, but you no longer have access to me or my family, my Catholic family, my immediate family, my family. You just can't be part of that.
Yeah. The first story in the Gospels that popped into my head when you started addressing this, Kate, was when Peter said, "Get behind me, Satan." I mean, Jesus was very accepting and welcoming kind of guy. But he was like, excuse me, no. And he said, get out of the way. And he removed Peter. He was like, he shut Peter down. Like, you can't do this. He also said multiple times, shake the dust from your boots. Like there were, you give people opportunities to do the right thing, but you don't let that stop you from helping someone else heal. You don't let that stop. You don't let someone stop you from, getting access to Christ. And in the situation of an abuser and someone who has been abused, the person that we should prioritize, I'm trying to synthesize, the person that we should prioritize is the one who has been abused.
Yeah.
So that we can't allow the abuser to continually get in the way of that person accessing the healing, the healing of Christ and the body of Christ. I'm trying to, I'm wrestling with it, and it's like I process externally.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Yeah. I want to lift up Sierra's comment too about something that I may not have been careful enough about in this talk, and so I apologize for that. But there is not a dichotomy between survivors and people in power or people with decision-making power. Many times they're the same. They're one and the same, and I can attest to that personally as being a survivor, and also being someone who has a responsibility with a lot of privilege and decisions to make. But probably most important to me is just the ability to see how everything is connected. And it might be connected in a single individual, but certainly back to that Corinthians reading, if one member of the body is suffering, the whole body is suffering. And that certainly includes people in clergy, music directors, leaders who are also members of survivor community. I hope and I pray that when those two roles intersect, that there is a lot of really strong people in the support system, in the inner circle around that person, because sometimes they're going to have to say things that are really triggering and difficult, and just cutting to the core of things that are the most important in their life, and they will need a lot of support. And Sierra, I hope that you have that, and I'm certainly grateful for that circle of people in my life too. And thank you for raising that important point.
Questions continue to come in, but it is 3:18. Kate, and I want to respect everyone's time. Kate and Laura, are there any questions in the Q&A that you feel like you'd like to address as we begin to wrap things up? Are there any? Let's move towards a closing, but I also don't want to rush it if anything has been put in there that we just need to address.
Yeah. Peter has some wonderful suggestions here from his experience about, I hope that this connects to another thing that I was trying to articulate about not being afraid to say things out loud, even if they're tough subjects or hard words to say. So he suggests specifically like naming it in the intercessions and intercessory prayer. And also to include conversations or topics or examples of abuse in preaching and homilies or sermons. And I think that that's really, really important. And I encourage, those of you who have the responsibility of preaching or writing prayer on a regular basis, to do that preparation work, not only in a bubble, but to do it in dialogue with people, sometimes a lot of people, sometimes a trusted colleague, just to make sure that it's about dialogue. It's about dialogue with God, but also with God's people. And so it's important to be careful about the words that we're choosing so that it doesn't cause inadvertently, totally in a non-malicious and unintentional way that doesn't cause continued harm. So when you get those carefully crafted, we should maybe work on this. I think I'm going to work on this for a project. Carefully crafted words to include in an intercessory prayer, or a careful way to couch the subject in a sermon where you know there's going to be children present and survivors present and generational perspectives present. But that's incredible advice. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, that was great advice. I would agree. I knew pretty quickly who allies were once this hit social media and other things. I happened to be being asked to join a parish to be their music director. And before I said yes to anything, the pastor put out a pre-synod report in, I want to say, May. And he was so surprised at, in their parish synod meetings, how many survivors of sexual assault from the church there were. In fact, because it wasn't his experience, the pastor, but this was becoming very clear in the parish that this was a pattern. And so we said, I can't even give the synod report yet, but because before I do, I want to address this and how sorry I am, and talked about resources. And so those kinds of things are important. Like just being an ally is just important to acknowledge it. So what Peter was saying, that's fabulous advice. Just acknowledge it and be there. What can we do? So, and from Kate said in the beginning, center survivor stories, whether it's from DH or anybody else, center them. What can we do to make this better for you? How can we best support you? And maybe, like, I love that you all asked, well, what dioceses are we're not going to ban his music? We will, like, that was fantastic. I would, and then you're like, we can publicly, like, that's exactly the kind of advocacy, little things like that, where it just is easy for you, but it means the world to those of us who are dealing with it. So,
yeah. And today we're primarily focused on sexual abuse. When you think about all of the kinds of abuse and the ways that people who have power misuse it, domestic abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, elder abuse, I think we can sum this up by saying that abused people are the church. And if we're not willing to change our ways in order to serve them and treat them like the ones who will inherit the kingdom that Christ tells us that they are, I think we're in the wrong line of work here. The women that I've met as a part of this horrific part of our church and company history are the church, and they're teaching me how to be the church, or teaching me how to be better church. And that's just the greatest gift. And I'm sorry about the ways that we have found one another, but I'm very, very grateful that these incredible people are a part of my life. So please believe women. Don't ask people to sing songs that are hard because of legitimate reasons. And thank you for even the time to consider the ways that we might continue to make each other better going forward.
Kate and Laura, thank you so much for taking the time, spending the energy, the emotional energy, and everything that went into this. We hope it's a good next step in this conversation, but certainly not the last. We will post this as soon as we have a little chance to process it and get it onto our YouTube channel, and we'll email all registrants with that link, and it'll be free and available on our YouTube channel. So please share it widely. And the last question that came in really early in the webinar was, if people want to follow up on this conversation with you, Kate, or Laura, are they able to do that? And if so, how?
Yeah, I'm on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. But the best way to probably make sure I see your question or your conversation point is to email me at katew@giamusic.com. And I welcome the opportunity to talk with you more.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Take care, everybody.
thank you.
Bye-bye.